Well, hello, folks, and welcome to this episode of the Texas Titans podcast. I am so excited you're here. I have been wanting to have this conversation for so long, and it finally happened. My guest today is Dr. Michael Eades. Dr. Eades is one of the foremost experts on the ketogenic low carb diets. He is a brilliant, brilliant human being. Dr. Eades is a medical doctor and an internationally recognized authority in low carb nutrition. He is the author and co-author of 10 books on health, nutrition, and exercise, including the New York Times bestseller Protein Power. Here's a little bit more about Dr. Eades. Dr. Eades was born in Springfield, Missouri, and educated in Missouri, Michigan, and California. He received his undergraduate degree in engineering from California State Polytechnic, Cal Poly University, and received his medical degree from the University of Arkansas. After completing his medical and postgraduate training, he and his wife, Mary Dan, founded Metastat Medical Clinics, a chain of ambulatory outpatient family care clinics in central Arkansas in 1981, among the first of their kind in the country. In 1986, Dr. Eades shifted to full-time practice of bariatric, nutritional, and metabolic medicine, gaining first-hand experience treating many thousands of people suffering from high blood pressure, diabetes, elevated cholesterol, and triglycerides, and obesity with the Protein Power nutritional regimen he and his wife developed. In 2001, he retired from clinical practice to devote his energies to research, writing, speaking, and since 2005, maintaining the blog of Dr. Michael Eades, listed as a top 100 health blog. In 2009, Dr. Eades, together with his wife and their sons, founded the global company Eades Appliance Technology to design, manufacture, and distribute the first sous vide water oven for the home kitchen, revolutionizing the quality and simplicity of healthful eating at home. Dr. Eades has been guest nutritional expert on hundreds of radio and television shows across the country, including national segments on Fox, NBC, ABC, CBS, CNN, and MSNBC. He continues to speak at medical and scientific conferences to the general public. He and his wife are currently at work on their 15th book, Protein Power 2.0, slated for publication in 2020. Folks, I use Protein Power as one of my go-to reference books on health and wellness and fitness and maintaining proper blood sugar levels, as well as a plethora of other things that will help to keep you healthy. I hope you enjoy this conversation I had with Dr. Eades, even a fraction as much as I enjoyed having it with him. Now, a little bit of a warning, please stay with us. He's in Santa Barbara during the conversation where the connection was a little spotty on his side, and so there are some pauses or whatever as a result of that, so please excuse some of the audio. Most of it is pretty solid, but just in those little parts right there, I want to go ahead and apologize in advance. Stick with it. We make it through the entire conversation, and it is a great conversation, and I am so grateful that you're here to listen to this episode of the Texas Titans podcast with today's Titan, Dr. Michael Eades. Thank you.
Agree. Dr. Michael Eades, how are you, sir?
Great. And you, Jason?
Well, I'm great. And I got to tell you that this is, I'm trying to contain my glee. Yeah, I'm trying to look like, I'm the pro podcaster that's real cool and everything, but I don't know how well I'll do for a couple of reasons. One, it's not often, although I have had a couple others, it's not often that I have a New York Times bestseller on the podcast, which is great. But more than anything, I just geek out on nutrition and health and fitness. And your book, Protein Power, is literally one of my favorite reference books that I keep beside. I mean, it's in my bathroom. It's always under my counter. It's what I use to measure my body fat. And you've taught me through your writing the power of insulin, the dangers of vegetable oils, the benefits of animal fats and why they're important. And like I told you before we got on, being 45 years old and trying to do everything I can to slow the clock on aging, I have become more acutely aware of the impact of nutrition in addition to the physical training. So all that to say, thank you so much for making this this time to be on the Texas Titan podcast. Like we said, I know we're going to get you back here into Texas at some point. You're out in Santa Barbara right now, and the world's kind of on shutdown. But I'm minting you an honorary Texan today, and you will. And if I call you a Texas Titan, you're a Texas Titan.
That's true.
So congratulations.
I'm a resident of Texas.
Absolutely. Well, and we're so glad to have you on today. Well, let's just start. Let's just jump right into it, Dr. Eades, and also I want to recognize too your wife Mary, who is your partner and co-author of Protein Power and does remarkable work as well in this. Where did your study start with protein, and what led to Protein Power, and kind of what took you down this lane?
I gained a bunch of weight when I was in practice. I had been thin most of my life, and when I got to be early to mid 30s, suddenly I just blossomed out into obesity. I mean, I wasn't morbidly obese or anything, but I probably gained about 40 pounds in a relatively short period of time, and it concerned me. And so I went back and kind of do like a lot of doctors do. I looked at whatever the fad diet is at the time, and I went on it, and I lost some weight, and then I immediately gained it back. And I got interested in these fasting programs. There was one called OptiFast that was hospital-based, and one called MediFast that was clinic-based, medical clinic-based, and they all required physician supervision. So I got involved with one of those and did pretty well, and a lot of patients saw my weight loss and they wanted to do it, so I started putting patients on this, and I quickly realized that it wasn't so much the fasting and the protein shakes, but that they could do this with real food and do just as well and a lot less expensively. So I kind of shifted it over to that, and when I read all of the the articles that came with these fasting programs when you signed up, I thought, this sounds suspiciously like these old low-carb diets that I had been taught in medical school were fad diets and that should be avoided. And so I kind of got in and started doing my own literature search, started going back to my biochemistry textbook that when I got out of medical school, I hoped I'd never have to look at again. And got poured through there and noticed as I went through and looked at all these biochemical pathways that are involved in weight gain and in the development of hypertension and diabetes, that they were all driven by the hormone insulin. And then I started thinking, okay, if you want that to get better, you've got to lower insulin. And how do you lower insulin? There's no pill to do it. The only way you can do it is to restrict carbohydrates from the diet. Mm-hmm. And the big flaw that I found in these fasting programs is that they basically used a low carbohydrate, low calorie diet. And both of those will combine to lower insulin really quickly. And so people had a pretty good weight loss. And then when they got down to their ideal weight, then what both of these outfits did was they recommended that they go back on low fat, high carb diets, which was just a recipe to get them right back in the place they were before they started. Right. So I altered it, and I started putting them on low-carb diets for maintenance, and that worked really well. And then I just started putting people on low-carb diets right from the start, and that's when it all started. And when I realized how quickly it worked and how much better they got and how much of an improvement that they saw in their lipids, their cholesterol, triglycerides, what kind of changes they saw in their blood sugar and their high blood pressure. I mean, high blood pressure and high blood sugar go down, within a day or two. I mean, it went down so quickly that I learned from kind of brutal experience to take people off their high blood pressure medicines and their sugar medicines when I started them on the program. Because if I didn't, I was going to be getting calls from them that they were falling out because their sugar dropped too quickly or their blood pressure dropped too quickly. Right. So I would take all those medications away at the start and then add them back in if needed. And very seldom did I ever need to add them back. And now, that's how the whole thing started. And then it just went from there.
Now, you mentioned fasting. So what would your fast look like? I've started intermittent fasting probably, it's been almost a year.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I've noticed is my mental acuity is greater. I mean, I'm a big, believer in fasting, and generally my fast, I do the 16-8. And then I'll do an occasional 24-hour, but usually I was doing a 24-hour at least once a week. Now I do that probably maybe once every 3 weeks. But I'll do probably a 6-day generally intermittent 16-8, 16 off and 8-hour feeding period. And I've enjoyed that quite a bit. Do you still fast? And kind of talk to the listeners a little bit about the benefits of fasting and how to do it in a healthy way. And if I'm doing it wrong, tell me that.
No. Well, the type of fasting that we were doing was not really fasting. It was called a protein sparing fast, and it involved drinking protein shakes throughout the day. And then we had them eat a meal in the evening. So it keeps the calories down, provides them with enough protein that to replace just the normal wear and tear of the body so that they didn't lose lean body mass. So it really wasn't fasting per se, like you're talking about intermittent fasting. But I think intermittent fasting is great. In fact, I do it from time to time myself. But the way I do it is I do it kind of from 6 p.m. to 6 p.m. so that I get to eat every day. And one day I'll eat up until 6 p.m. and then I don't eat anything until 6 p.m. the next day. Then I have to look forward to dinner that night. And so that I don't go a whole waking day without food. Either I've eaten earlier or I'm going to eat later. And if you try to do, I've noticed, because I've tried to do just, a whole day at a time, and I've done that a lot, where you do every other day fasting.
Right.
Because that's how a lot of the work was done originally with animals, was every other day. And if you do every other day fasting, you're really fasting for, the 8 hours before you start and the 8 hours after, plus the 16 hours that you're awake. So that's whatever that is, 16. And so, it's a 32-hour fast and not a 24-hour fast.
Right.
And all the, all the research work, much of it done by a guy named Matson in D.C., with animal models, shows that, if you put animals on alternate day fasting, rodents, for example, what you find out is that they lose weight and they become healthier, even though they don't eat fewer calories than the ones who are feeding ad lib. In other words, you take genetically similar rats, you divide them into two groups, and you put one group in and you just provide them with continuous food and you measure how much they eat. Then you take the others and you fast them every other day. And on the day that they're not fasting, you provide them with continuous food, and they'll eat as much in one day as the others do in 2 days. So there's not a big caloric difference in what they're eating, but there's a huge difference in health outcome, because the ones that do alternate day fasting tend to generate more what's called BDNF, brain-derived neurotropic factor, which makes your brain plasticity increase, and they have cognitive improvement. They can run mazes better. They have a better coat, better fur coat. They live longer, even though they're eating the same amount of calories, just giving them this day of sort of metabolic rest. So they live longer. They live, I can remember 20, 30% longer than the other rats. They don't develop the diseases of aging that the other rats do until much, much later. So it's beneficial all the way around for them. It probably is for humans too. It's just more difficult to test in humans because rats have a fairly limited lifespan.
Right. And Dr. Eades, that microphone on your headpiece is sometimes it's kind of rubbing your shirt. It's caused a little bit of static every once in a while. So just to make sure.
I thought I was using this microphone. Is this not on?
I think it's the one on your headpiece. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And so it's kind of rubbing your shirt. Just wanted to let you know that.
All right.
So with regard to the fasting also, now one of the things to explain a little bit is the autophagy also, which I guess in again, I'm not a doctor, nor do I play one in real life. You're the one in real life and all that. But so with regard to cell regeneration, is that one of the major benefits of the fasting? And how can, like, again, my simple mind 45, I want my cells to keep generating at the most maximum, the most optimal level, obviously, because I don't want to look my age. I don't want to feel my age. So what are the things that I can do to make sure that I have that cell regeneration, increasing at its highest level?
Well, autophagy is one of them because that keeps the cells cleaned out of cellular debris.
Okay.
And most of the cellular debris is chewed up, damaged proteins. And when you go on a fast, an alternate day fast, or a regular fast, or even to a certain extent when you go on a low carb diet, what ends up happening is you go into what's called ketosis. And ketosis is a partial breakdown product of fat that replaces sugar, basically. Allows your brain to run on ketones. Your brain still needs a little bit of sugar, although that's iffy. People experimentally have gotten people's glucose way down while they're in ketosis without any problems, but they were afraid to go much lower. They got them down to 25 milligrams per deciliter, and the people were fine who were in ketosis, but they never took them lower than that, and they never will, because you could never get it through an institutional review board. And back then, when they did those studies in the 60s, they didn't have institutional review boards, so they were allowed to do it. But so ketones replace sugar in the blood, and the heart prefers them. The muscles can use them, and then you use protein to make sugar, because you've got to have a certain level of sugar supposedly in the blood. So as your body needs it, you break down protein for that. And if you're not eating, where's the protein going to come from? Well, it's going to come from your muscle mass, because that's the big protein reservoir in the mammalian body. But there's also another reservoir, and that's all these chewed up proteins inside of cells. And so when you're in ketosis, that basically sends a signal to the cells to clean themselves up and kind of regurgitate that protein out, all those amino acids, so that they can be reformulated into proteins to make your lean body mass, or to maintain your lean body mass. And so that's why going on a fast or even a low carb diet will stimulate autophagy. And what autophagy means is just the cells eating themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a good thing, because one of the signs of aging that you can see histologically or microscopically is that the cells accumulate debris over time. And so if you can keep those cells clean, you're going to be better off, and they're going to be more functional than if they're basically jammed up with a bunch of junk.
Right. Now let's get into something that I know is that you devoted a lot of your research to, and kind of take us. Here's the kind of the trajectory I'd like to. You take it anywhere you want to, doctor. But so your hypothesis on why people get fat, because I mean, let's face it, we're seeing now more obesity than at any other time. America is kind of the poster child for, the obese nation. And it's one of my greatest frustrations, because while we argue about, and I don't, one thing I do, I stay away from politics on the Texas Titan podcast, but there is policy that comes because of a lot of irresponsible behavior, right? I mean,
right.
We a lot of politicians are trying to write policy just to make up for a bunch of irresponsible behavior from our fellow Americans. And one of those is eating habits. And I just see this sea of people who are just not even doing the most minor things to keep themselves healthy. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to help one understand that if you're overweight, it does all sorts of damage to the body, other than just the vanity. Take the vanity aspect out of it. So talk a little bit about your hypothesis on why we have become so fat. And then we've mentioned several times, or you have the low carb diet, and not all low carb diets are created equal. There's, the Atkins approach, there's yours and Mary's approach, and there's, that can mean different things. So kind of take the listener through why we're getting fat, the correction that can be taken by lowering carbs, raising the protein levels, and then what a balanced low carb diet from your perspective looks like.
Wow, that's a lot. The whole question of why we get fat is a controversial issue. You wouldn't think that it is, but it really is. And academicians have kind of siloed themselves off in two different silos, basically. And you've got the people who think it's all a matter of calories, and you could essentially eat anything you want as long as you keep calories down, and you're going to lose weight. And thus the old mantra from your doctor: you need to exercise more and eat less, and you'll lose weight. And the reason that you've gained weight is because you've exercised less and eaten more. And then you've got people who think that there's a hormonal basis for weight loss. And I'm not talking about thyroid hormones. I'm talking about insulin and glucagon, the main metabolic hormones. And the people all the time say, well, you've eaten too much and you haven't exercised enough, and therefore you've gained all this weight, which is really, on the one hand, seems reasonable, but the other hand is kind of a stupid thing to say, because it's not telling you the reason. It's not giving you the reason why. And that's an important reason. I mean, years ago, I got involved with a family restaurant, and you would have all these people swarm in at times, and other times when you thought people were going to swarm in and you overstaffed for it, nobody came. And it was an endless topic of conversation and speculation. Why are we so busy right now? Or why is it so dead right now? And if we were really busy and somebody said, what's happening? Why are all these people in it? And I said, well, it's really easy. There are more people coming in than are going out. That's why we're busy. I said, of course, you moron. The question is why? What that night? Was there a football game? Was there a play that let out early? There's a reason for it, and there's a reason for that people gain weight. Why do they go? Why have Americans been stable for decades? Really, I mean, decades since they've been started keeping weight. Back in the early 1900s, obesity really hasn't budged much, and then all of a sudden in late 1970s, the curve started upwards, and it's just gone screaming upwards since then. And so you have to ask yourself why. And the old thing, well, you're eating more and exercising less, doesn't hack it, because that doesn't give you a reason why. And one of the reasons why is that we're eating about 250 calories more a day now on average than we were back in the late 1970s. And so, again, you've got to say, why? Why are we eating more calories now than we were then? Are calories tastier now than they were then? I mean, what's the problem? Why the big change? And one of the big changes in the late 1970s was the government decided to jump into the whole nutritional arena, and the government, and this based on zero evidence, and that's what's so insane about it when you look back on it, based on zero evidence, decided that a low-fat, high-carbohydrate diet was the way to go, and also that you should avoid eating saturated fat, which is primarily found in animal products. You can get some saturated fat in plant products, but for the most part, it comes from animal products. And that you should stop eating saturated fat, or really ratchet back your intake of saturated fat and eat polyunsaturated fat instead. And that was based on the idea that was coming along at the time that heart disease was driven by cholesterol levels, and many people still believe that today, although it's a hypothesis, and it's called a hypothesis still because it's never been proven. It's called the lipid hypothesis, that cholesterol drives heart disease, and saturated fat to a certain extent will drive cholesterol levels up. So that's why they wanted to back the saturated fat off, and and so that all happened in the late 1970s, early 1980s is when it really started going. So we started eating more carbohydrates, less fat, and less saturated fat, and now the results are there for all to see. And obviously, it was a flawed idea, because obesity rates are, huge compared to what they were then. Diabetes rates are epidemic compared to what they were then. And all this change is this extra 250 calories a day of mainly carbohydrate. Overall, fat intake hasn't gone down very much, or hasn't changed very much, and protein intake hasn't changed very much. And what's really changed is carbohydrate intake, and it's gone screaming upward. And if you look at, and so, you say, why? Well, then if you look around at what's really changed in the diet, other than this added carbohydrate, I mean, protein's protein, and that's pretty much stayed the same. But when you start getting in and teasing apart what's happened to the fat intake, you see some major changes. And two of the things that have changed is that saturated fat intake has gone way down, and polyunsaturated fat intake has gone way up. And polyunsaturated fats, contrary to widespread belief, are not particularly benign. And cardiologists love them because they get cholesterol down, because cardiologists are so wrapped up in this idea that elevated cholesterol causes heart disease. And so they're all for it because they do bring the weight. I mean, they do bring the LDL levels down. But a couple of studies that have been unearthed that were done years ago, where they fed people saturated fats, in mental hospitals, divided them into two groups where they could control their intake, and fed them saturated fat in one group and vegetable oil, corn oil mainly in the other group. The death rate was much higher in the corn oil groups. And both of those studies were just kind of put in the bottom drawer of the desk and forgotten about until some researchers have dragged those out in the last few years and looked at them and said, holy cow.
Mm-hmm.
And so, as I say, these oils are not benign, and there's a hypothesis out there that I think is probably valid, that is highly technical and hard to go into, for a general audience, but that shows that polyunsaturated fats, in terms of weight gain, kind of act like a carbohydrate on steroids. They actually increase the flow of fat into the fat cells and make them bigger. And so if that's the case, and just based on basic biochemistry, it makes perfect sense to me. What you see, I mean, that would explain this increase in obesity, because you're eating carbs. Carbs run insulin levels up. Insulin levels makes you store fat. And because there's no kind of shut off for this fat storage because of the increased intake of polyunsaturated fats, that just adds flame to the fire. And when you put that all together, you've got a perfect storm for weight gain.
So in order to balance that out and to get to, like, whenever, and if I'm not mistaken, you actually advised Tim Ferriss, I believe, on his, what he calls a slow carb diet, which is not just, it's not all or nothing. It's not like, these people that decide, well, I'm going to eat nothing but a pound of bacon and eggs and all, whatever. But yours is more of a paleo type low carb. Would that be a correct?
Yeah, I guess. I mean, I don't have a specific diet. I mean,
sure.
It's funny, back when we wrote Protein Power, there were about 500 variations of low-fat diets and one low-carb diet.
Right.
And now it's just kind of gone the other way. There's now one low-fat, high-carb diet, and there's paleo, there's carnivore, there's just regular low-carb, there's ketogenic. There are a million variations of the low-carb diet. So things have kind of switched sides. And I think that people ought to probably stay in what's called nutritional ketosis, because that tells you that the autophagy is taking place. It's going to increase your brain-derived neurotropic factor. It's going to make you think better. It's going to make your heart work better. The heart performs 28% better on ketones than it does on anything else. Your muscles can use ketones. You just are all around better off being in a little bit of ketosis, and it's really easy to check these days. And what's really bad is to let your blood sugars fluctuate.
Right.
And people now can go out and get these continuous glucose monitors, and that is a real wake-up call. And you can get them without a prescription. Your insurance probably won't pay for them if you can't get your doctor to prescribe one, but it's about $100 for a month. And if you don't have diabetes, a month is all it takes. 2 weeks is all it takes to really give you some major enlightenment, because what I've discovered with those is that different people respond to different carbohydrates differently.
Yep.
And I wore one for about a month just to check myself. And it's really interesting what I found because, I pretty much avoid bread and potatoes and ice cream and, all the things that you tend to think of are high carb. And when I was doing this for this month, it gave me a chance to kind of blow things out and in the name of scientific inquiry.
Of course. Right.
So I didn't have to feel guilty about it. And I really learned some incredible things. One of the things that I learned was that bread doesn't particularly run my sugar up. Now, I didn't eat tons of it. I mean, I'd eat a piece of it, but that didn't run my blood sugar up. And what did run my blood, and potatoes, my wife loves these little bitty potatoes. They're purple and, different colored, and they're about the size of a cherry tomato. And so we'll have those with a giant chunk of meat every night. And I was worried that those were probably running my blood sugar up. Zero effect.
Wow.
And so again, I didn't have a giant baked potato. I had those little, maybe 6 of those little bitty things cut in half, not a huge amount. But the evening meal that we usually have is probably some tomatoes and those little potatoes and a steak or a piece of salmon or a half a chicken or something like that. Mainly it tends toward the carnivore thing and and a glass of wine. And my blood sugar didn't move with that. I mean, did not move. And so then I started fooling around with it, adding stuff. And so I decided to add some ice cream for dessert one night to see what happened, and didn't move. And I thought, whoa, somehow this ice cream it's getting hidden in all the food. The food that I'm eating is somehow suppressing, because the ice cream had sugar in it. And it's reasonable to assume that that's going to run your blood sugar up. So I waited till the next afternoon when I hadn't eaten. I didn't eat lunch. And so it had been about 4 or 5 hours since I'd had anything to eat. And I had the same size bowl of ice cream straight across. No sugar increase, the blood sugar increase. And I was stunned about that. And then we had sushi one night, and sushi absolutely sent it through the roof. The rice and sushi. Yeah. Yep. I mean, sent it through the roof. And then the thing that was the most surprising of all, because this is the food that everybody, the whole slow carb movement loves, is steel cut oats. And so we got steel cut oats and fixed them, and I ate them with nothing at all. And one of the things that kind of interesting about low carb dieting is when you don't eat a lot of sugar, things that normally don't taste sweet actually taste sweet.
Yep.
And so if you get green beans after you've been on a low carb diet, they taste sweet even though they haven't been sweetened, because your sweet taste buds are so sensitized. And so I didn't have to eat anything with the oatmeal because it already tasted sweet. And so I had a big bowl of this oatmeal, and my blood sugar went up. And not only did it go up to sushi, it went up, and then it came back down. The blood sugar with with the oatmeal went up and stayed up for about 3 hours.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting you say that, doctor, because, Abby, my youngest, who is a type 1 diabetic, has noticed the exact same thing. Now, she did the Dexcom monitor at first before she got her pump. And so it was the same way. There were things that she just thought, I can never eat this again, but she would slowly introduce them back into her diet, because one of the things that she did, and, she's kind of like me. She's pretty OCD about certain things, and one of those is her diet. And when I say diet, I just mean what she eats. She's not. She doesn't do diets. We don't do those. But when she went to the doctor for the first time, she's like, I'm just going to keep my blood sugar low as naturally as possible. I do not want to put any more insulin in myself than I have to. And so whenever she would go to her regular checkups in Dallas, they said, okay, Abby, it's great that you're controlling this, you're keeping your carbs down, but they actually said told her you need some more carbs, because she was keeping it so low to where, she was almost using no insulin. Now, she was in what I know you're familiar with, the honeymoon phase, where her pancreas was still, generating a little, insulin. But then what she would realize is there are certain things I can eat that don't have as big of an effect. But she loves oatmeal, and that was one of those that for some reason, would just send it up and keep it up. And she still will eat it, very controlled, obviously, but that was one of those weird ones. And
Yeah.
and that's what I've started to learn too, is that whenever you become sensitive, and this very well may be somewhat psychological, but after reading Protein Power and being more understanding of the power of insulin and what it does, those things that cause the blood sugar spikes for me have a profound impact on my mood, on my energy levels. It's really been quite remarkable. And I mean, to the point that it's just like, there's some things I just don't even want to touch anymore because I know I'm going to get lethargic, not long afterwards. But more than anything, my mood really changes as a result of it.
Mm-hmm. And it can change your hunger levels too, because when sugar goes up quickly and then when it comes down quickly, one of the strongest stimuli to eat is a falling blood sugar, not a low blood sugar, but a blood sugar dropping quickly. And that'll make you hungry again, especially if it overshoots and it ends up lower than it started out for a little while. And I mean, I think your daughter is really smart to monitor her carbs closely, because far too many people treat diabetes by putting people on insulin and then treating the exogenous insulin with dietary carbohydrates.
Yeah.
So we're going to put you on this insulin level, and then we want you to eat enough carbs that your blood sugar doesn't go down. And it should be just the other way around. You should treat your blood sugar with insulin and keep the dose as low as possible, because there's this phenomenon. It's not really a phenomenon, but there's this kind of what you call the law of small numbers, because insulin is not absorbed the same way all the time. There's irregularity in absorption. It can be 10, 15, 20%. And if you're taking 100 units a day, that's a 20 unit change one way or the other in terms of absorption. If you're taking 10 units a day, that's 2 units. And 2 units is not going to have nearly the effect that 20 units will have. And so it's really good to, I guess she's on a pump now, so that takes care of it. But when people are giving insulin, far too often they, the doctor prescribes it and then says, make sure you eat enough carbs that your sugar doesn't go down. And so you're treating exogenous insulin that you're giving yourself by eating carbs, and you end up gaining weight as a result.
Yeah, and trying to tell that to a 17-year-old girl is not very easy. And Abby, that's the first thing she said whenever we left the doctor, after she had really been managing it so well. And they said, well, you need more carbs. And she's like, she got in the car and she says, no, I don't want to get fat. I don't want to start having it. I can't believe this.
She's smart.
Well, okay. So, and one of the things I wanted to ask you about, Doc, is that, so are you familiar with David Sinclair's work that he's doing? He wrote the book Lifespan. Okay. And he's a PhD. He's not an MD, just to be clear. But some of his research I find very fascinating. And one of his takes is that with regard to aging, that we treat aging as just kind of a foregone conclusion because we're all going to do it. But he makes the argument that we should be treating aging more like a disease and being more proactive with the genome sequencing and that sort of thing. Do you have an opinion on that?
Yeah, I mean, I agree that it should. I mean, it's an inevitable disease, but it should be treated like that, I think, nonetheless. And one of the best things that you can do to prevent aging, basically, or to slow it down, is to keep your sugar under control, because sugar is absolutely toxic to cells. I mean, it's like oxygen. Oxygen is toxic too. I mean, it rusts, and it kind of rusts you if you get too much of it. And so you've got to maintain this balance with just enough oxygen to do what it needs to do and not any more. That's why you don't want to breathe pure oxygen unless you got a breathing problem, because then you're not getting pure oxygen into your blood, basically. But but you're getting lower amounts. But it's the same thing with sugar. I mean, sugar, there's a whole concept called glucotoxicity that's all over the medical literature. I mean, it damages cells. It creates all kinds of problems. And so you want to keep your sugar as low as you can. And in order to keep your sugar low, you've got to maintain insulin sensitivity. And people in these centenarian studies, and this is not randomized control study kind of proof, but in the centenarian studies, when centenarians have been looked at to see what their commonalities are. One of the commonalities is that they have low insulin levels. Their insulin levels are not high. And so they're sensitive to insulin. And so, that's one of the things you need to do is to keep stay sensitive to insulin. To prevent aging, you can do that by alternate day fasting. You can do it with low carb dieting. You can do it by really low calorie dieting. Although I don't think that's the best because you generally don't get enough protein that way to make up for the wear and tear that where you lose the protein just during everyday breakdown. And plus, if you have a really low calorie diet, sometimes your protein is going to convert to glucose, and you end up consuming protein as glucose. And so that's why I don't particularly like that. And if you lose muscle mass, and that's why you see all these vegans who go around and they're all a lot of them are really thin. And one of the things that you don't want to have happen to you as you get older is to become frail,
right?
And become sarcopenic, to have muscle loss. And it's been shown in multiple studies that, people think they get weaker as they get older. They don't really get weaker, and their muscles don't get weaker. What happens is they just have less muscle. And when you look at these studies where they compare muscle in an 80-year-old man and a 25-year-old man, it's exactly the same per given cross-sectional area of muscle. It's just that generally the 85-year-old or 80-year-old man has a lot less muscle, say, in his thigh than he did when he was 25. But if you do resistance training and work out, you can still maintain muscle into old age. And, one of the big reasons people get in trouble when they're elderly is they fall. And that's a little bit of a balance problem, but it's also a little bit of a problem of just frailty.
Right.
They get up and they stumble and they can't catch themselves and they fall. And I mean, it's they can't lift groceries up. I mean, there are all kinds of problems that they have, but falls are a big one. And so you want to maintain your muscle mass as long as you can. And just knowing that if you have the same muscle mass when you're 85 as you did when you're 25, it's going to work the same.
Right.
So the muscle itself doesn't deteriorate. There's just less of it generally, unless you do something. I mean, you tend to gain muscle mass and maintain muscle mass till you're 30, somewhere around in there. It's going to vary by the individual. But then after that, there's just this progressive decline of about 1% a year until, for the rest of your life, unless you do something to maintain it.
Now, with regard to proteins, because there's a lot more plant-based proteins that are coming on the market, and I've always whey, I guess, is pretty much what I try to get as much protein from natural, from whole foods as possible. Eggs being the primary one. I'm a big beef eater. Don't eat as much beef as I used to, but I still love red meat. So, is there a benefit or a pro or con of the type of protein that we're consuming? Should it be a mix? What's your take on that?
Oh, my own opinion is that there should be a mix. That's another one of those controversial things. I mean, I like to get as much protein as I can from beef, from animal sources, because it's a more complete protein, and you get a lot of other stuff that goes along with it. You get a lot of zinc, and if you eat liver, you get vitamin A, and a lot of things that you need, especially in these COVID times, that will enhance your immunity.
Right. And that's one of the things I want to talk about too, just because it's so apropos for what's going on in the world right now. What are some things, just some simple things that basically every human being can do right now to best ensure that their immune system is at peak performance, be it diet, exercise? Should they make any? I mean, I would think we'd want to have a sound immune system at all times. I'm constantly, like, I just finished my athletic greens. That's what I usually break my fast with. And then I'll go into a huge salad. And, I'm like doing everything I can to keep my immune system up. But what are some things that people should be doing right now to truly optimize their immune system?
Well, just, to preface it all, by your telling me that you have a big salad and you eat your, what are they called? What kind of greens are they called?
So it's called athletic greens. It's just a green powder, one of those.
Yeah. Yeah. What a lot of people don't realize is that all of the nutritionally valuable substances in plants and salads and probably in your athletic greens come from the colorful compounds in there, the carotenoids, the lycopenes, the carotene, all these things that give plants color, these phytochemicals in there, and they're virtually all fat soluble. So if you eat a giant salad and you don't eat any fat with it, that all just goes right through.
Okay.
So you've got to, people that like to eat salads, and now, they'll say, well, I'm just going to put, no fat dressing on it. Well, why eat the salad? You're essentially just eating water,
right.
because none of that stuff is going to stick, because unless you have fat along with it, you don't absorb it.
Right.
And it's the same thing with like taking vitamin D, for example. Vitamin D is a fat soluble vitamin, and if you don't take it along with some fat, you don't get the benefit of it. But I think the things that people can do right now, get outside and get some sunlight. Take vitamin D3 with vitamin K2, because D3 kind of stores calcium away for you, but K2 more or less directs it where to store it. And you don't want to have it stored in your arteries necessarily. You want it stored in your bones.
Right.
But D3 is a real immune enhancer, which is one of the reasons that you don't have flu and you don't have a lot of these infectious diseases in the summer, because everybody's out in the sun and they get vitamin D. And in the winter, their vitamin D levels really drop off. And so that's why a lot of people think that they get more infections because their vitamin D levels are lower. And that, that's kind of a controversial thing, but it does make sense because vitamin D is an immunoenhancer. So I would get, during these times, I'd probably take 5,000 units a day of vitamin D with some K2, and you can find vitamin D3 plus K2. You can also eat vitamin A. If you eat cheese that's got K2 in it, which is a good source. If you eat, you can take some vitamin A or eat liver once a week. Get vitamin A that's also immune enhancing. And those are the two vitamins that are, big immune enhancers that I would make sure I took, or eat a lot of liver or stay in the sun a lot during these COVID times, to kind of, and some vitamin C too, to fend this off, to ward it off.
Right.
Some doctors that I know have given, and I've read a lot of doctors giving, IV vitamin C to people who've been diagnosed with COVID, and they say this is all anecdotally. I've never seen it studied, but they seem to say that their patients do a lot better with that.
Right. Right. Well, and one of the things, going back to the kind of the David Sinclair question, that, to me, those are things that, we should all be trying to do every day. And I've noticed that you're wearing an Apple Watch. I'm wearing an Apple Watch. I have become obsessed with tracking and data. I just, closing those 3 rings has almost become, a little bit, again, one of my obsessive compulsions. Do you think that we will ever reach a point where, and again, this is probably not a fair question for you as a physician as opposed to a policymaker, but I'll just say this. I think that it could be a benefit at some point where we actually are able to prescribe wearable devices. I think the wearable devices and the tracking and the data capture that we can do, and the thing that made me think about that whenever you were mentioning that, doctor, is that I want to know what vitamins I'm deficient of at all times. I would love to be able to have there to be an efficient and cost-effective way to get routine blood screening. Just because I know you're involved in so many things. I mean, you're an entrepreneur, an author, researcher. Do you think there will ever be a time where we can, combined with our Apple Watches, also be able to at home, or send off like whatever the ancestry.com things, to have a continual blood monitoring to make sure that we are being proactive and keeping our vitamins and everything in check? Is that going to happen, do you think?
I don't know.
And would that be of a great benefit?
That's what Theranos was all about. the the Elizabeth Holmes deal, and it was to check all kinds of labs, but um, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know if you're going to be able to continuously monitor all that stuff. Glucose is pretty easy to continuously monitor. I mean, I wish there were a continuous insulin monitor, but right now you can't really do that because of the way the insulin test has to be done. Makes it much more difficult to do that, and probably vastly more costly, if it could even be done. And I don't know technologically. I mean, you never say never with technology, but I think it would be a real feat to have a continuous monitoring of your blood levels of everything.
Right. But with that being said, that kind of brings us back to your practice, your wheelhouse or discipline rather, is if we can't do that, all things being equal, monitor the glucose. That would probably be the best thing we've got, right?
Right. Yeah. Monitor glucose, get an insulin test, just kind of see what it is. A fasting insulin, you can get some information from that. It's better if you do a more elaborate testing process, but a lot of people don't do that. But you can do just a fasting insulin at some point and a fasting glucose for that, and then look up HOMA on Google, and that'll tell you how to use those numbers and come up with a factor that tells you how insulin sensitive you are, and you want to have more insulin sensitivity. And if you can get a continuous glucose monitor, which the Freestyle Libras are really neat, and it costs about $100 a month to get the little things, and you have a little deal that you stick on the back of your arm, and you put it all together. My only gripe with it is it's not really totally clear how to put it all together, but you put it together and put it on the back of one of your arms and punch the button, and it sticks this little thing in your arm that doesn't even really hurt. I mean, the needle is so tiny and it doesn't go in very far, and it really attaches, and you can wear it in the shower and sleeping and everything, and you just kind of put it on the back. They show you where to put it on your arm, so there's less of a chance you're going to catch it on something and pull it off. And if you did catch it on something and pull it off, it wouldn't be the end of the world. You just have to get another sensor. And then you just use your smartphone and run it. I don't have one on right now, but you just run it over and it makes a little noise and pull it up there, and you can look and see what your sugar is. And it's not just your sugar at that moment. I guess know from your daughters, it collects it. There's a little chip in the sensor, and it collects it for the last 6 or 7 hours. So you get your blood sugar curve for the whole time since you last tested it. And it's really nice, and it's got a way on there that you can put down if you eat. Like if I ate the ice cream, you put it down. So you go back later if something happened. You say, I wonder why my sugar went up. Well, because you ate right then.
Exactly.
But it's really enlightening to see. Beer doesn't particularly, drink a beer. I wouldn't have any kind of much of a response to it. But man, did sushi rice, and oatmeal just put mine over the moon.
Wow.
And so then you can, it'll let you loosen up a little bit on the things that you maybe before didn't eat a lot of, and make you tighten down on some stuff that you thought you were being good on.
Right.
And, with the goal being to keep your your glucose down. And the funny thing that I noticed in wearing it was that everything was level, and I wanted to keep it that way. So, once I went through my testing period, okay, what does this do? What does that do? What happens if I eat an apple? What happens if I do this? What happens if I do that? Once I got through that period and that I was just wearing it for the heck of it, then it became my goal to keep it down, to keep it low all the time. And there were times that I probably would have eaten something that I shouldn't have, that I avoided because I didn't want to have this big blip on my blood sugar curve.
Yeah. Oh yeah. No, that's me. That's why I love data so much. I'm obsessed with, I don't want to have to look and see that one little slip, that reminder, it's kind of like the difference between using a credit card or a debit card and cash. If I see the cash leave, I'm much less likely to actually do it. Yeah. Credit card, it hides it, a little bit better. Yes,
exactly. I'm the same way. I have to fork over the cash. I won't do it. A card. Here it is.
Exactly. Exactly. Well, Dr. Eades, and we're bumping up on an hour here, and I think our connection's getting a little spotty. You'd mentioned out there it's been kind of tough, so I'm so grateful for this time we've had. I do want to ask. I'm hoping that the bandwidth will stick with us just a little bit longer, because one of the things that I know that by trade, you bariatrics is something that you have, that you actually practice. And one of the things we're hearing more and more about, I have not done the homework or the research for myself, but it's kind of the next thing I want to dive into is gut health. And so, is that something that, how keen are you on that? Is it just part of the mix? Just what are some thoughts on monitoring that? You will hear of leaky gut, which sounds gross, but I hear it's really bad. Talk to us just a little bit about that.
Well, leaky gut is, man, when you talk about gut health, you have your microbiome is one thing, and then you've got leaky gut, which is another thing. And leaky gut is when, the enterocytes, the cells of your, the inside wall of your intestines are hooked together. I mean, they're not really hooked together. They're just up close like that with what are called tight junctions. And they stay like that because what the cells do, the enterocytes do, which are like skin cells, but on the inside of your small intestine. And what those do is they pull stuff into the cells to process it before they put it out the other side. And since they're cells and not just one big, long, continuous cells, they have joints in between them. And sometimes you can get gut inflammations that make these tight junctions open up a little bit. And when they open up a little bit, then you can get stuff through into the bloodstream that shouldn't get into the bloodstream. And there's this whole concept of what's called molecular mimicry. And that means that if you get a little peptide, which a peptide is just a string of amino acids put together. So let's say you're digesting food and you're breaking down protein into the amino acids. There's a little chain in there that happens to slip through this loosened tight junction. It can stimulate your immune response, because that's what your immune response is designed to do, is to ward off invaders from the outside. And that's actually an invader because it hadn't been broken down and processed inside the cell. And that can stimulate a sort of a hyperimmune response to that particular protein segment. And if that particular protein segment happens to mimic a protein segment in your joint, then your immune system can turn on your joints. And sometimes some people think that autoimmune disorders are sometimes initiated by a leaky gut and, gut inflammation. Mm-hmm. So that's why it's pretty good to, to maintain good gut health. And one of the things you can do to maintain good gut health is, in my view, is stay on a pretty low carb diet, because when you get on a higher carb diet, you can end up having small bowel intestinal overgrowth, which creates gas, creates GERD, this reflux problem that a lot of people have. And because the gas increases the pressure, and some people think that that's going to increase this breakdown of the tight junctions. And when you're eating carbs, fat and protein don't really cause a gas. The bacteria that work on those basically don't produce the gas like the carbs do, because the carbs more or less ferment.
Yeah. Oh, I've noticed that, Dr. Eades. Huge. I mean, if I eat if I eat a bunch of carbs, it's ridiculous, the difference in just the bloat and the gas. I mean, where if I'm on a very high protein, minimal carb diet, it's no problem. And I have terrible acid reflux, and I actually get it so bad that I get the heart attack symptoms or whatever. It's just extreme pain. And if it never fails, if I eat like a greasy pizza and then followed by cake or something like that, just really carbs. Oh man, that's just a license for disaster.
Yeah. Well, that's one of the things when I first started practice that I learned, because I didn't have GERD myself, and I didn't even talk to patients about it because I didn't know that there was really any connection. But people kept coming in and they had just started, and they would, they'd come back for a follow-up a week later to kind of see how everything was going and if they had any questions and all that. And a lot of them would just say, is this supposed to get rid of my heartburn? Because I've always had bad heartburn. I started this and it's completely gone away. And I said, well, I mean, I don't know why it would, but I'm glad it did. And then I just kept hearing that over and over and over. And now it's really well known. And people think that the mechanism has to do with this small bowel overgrowth, because when you have these bacteria in your lower small intestine and they get fed a lot of carbs, they produce gas, and the gas goes back up through the intestine, causing the bloating that you're describing. It gets in the stomach, and then it pushes up through the esophagus. And there's this ring in the bottom of the esophagus called the lower esophageal sphincter, that what its purpose is that when you eat, food goes down the esophagus, that opens and it drops it into the acid bath in the stomach, and then it clamps down. And like all muscles, like we talked about earlier, as you age, you lose a little bit of muscle mass. And so people, when they're young, they have a really tight lower esophageal sphincter. And as they get older and that muscle mass kind of declines, it's not as muscular and as tight. And so they'll develop this when this back pressure pushes up. And especially when they're lying down and it opens it up, then stomach acid gets up in there. And then that's when it really burns and can be agonizing. And so a low carb diet almost uniformly gets rid of that. And so I tell people, even if you don't need to lose weight, if you've got GERD, man, go on a low carb diet, because there's nothing that'll fix it more quickly.
I'm a firsthand account of it. I mean, I had it. I was on, I don't know, Prevacid, one of those back when it was still prescribed. Whenever I was much younger. Now I don't take anything, and if unless I know I'm just going to go purposely, I bring it on myself. It's not going to happen just because I know it is directly. There's a direct correlation.
Right, and actually, it doesn't even happen so much. I mean, once you get it beaten back, the bacteria have got to build up in there, and if you just have one big carb blowout, it usually won't do it.
That's right.
But if you do it consistently for a while, it will. So it's like I always tell people, you're better off going face down in the donuts and eating a box of them all at once than eating 2 every day for a week, because then it'll come back for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, not that I'm advocating going face down in the donuts, but you're going to do it. It usually doesn't come back with one big blowout, but it'll do it if people do it consistently.
Right. Well, Dr. Eades, I want to be respectful of your time. We're at an hour. I could go on and on. I could pick your brain for the rest of the day. And I want to tell you that I'm so grateful for you making the time, but thank you for the work you're doing. I think that the work you do is so important. I'm a strong advocate, as I'm sure you've gathered, of preventive health versus, why treat, symptoms and illnesses? Why not prevent them altogether? And so much of your work that you have done, your life's work, has, I think, contributed to that mindset and that movement. And so for that, thank you for yours as well as your wife's work that you've done. Please, Godspeed, keep it up. And if you ever need a good research subject, man, if you ever need a guinea pig, I'm all in. I trust you, and I'll do anything I can to help promote your work.
Well, I'm glad to hear it, and I'm glad that you're a preventative buff, because as I tell people, everybody, when you ask doctors, when you ask anybody, everybody always talks about prevention. Why don't we do something to maintain health? And in all my years of practice, I have never had a single patient come into me, and when I walk in the room saying, well, hey, what's going on? What can I do for you? Say, Doc, I feel so damn good right now. I mean, I couldn't feel better, and I just want to stay that way. But it never happens. Right. They always come in because they get sick.
Right. Exactly.
So it makes me wonder about the value. I mean, there's a great value to prevention, but I mean the value in people's mind to prevention, because they just they take good health for granted until it's gone.
That's right. And I think we're waking up to that. I hope so. I think there's a larger segment that are realizing, hey, I do have the power to control a lot of these negative outcomes. And that's where I am, Dr. Eades. I'm like, anything I can do. It's not just about living longer, but I know I'm going to live longer. I mean, the stats show that I'm probably going to live longer, and just in my immediate family, even we've got heart disease in our family, and our people still live for a pretty long time, but there's a big difference, as you well know, and I'm sure you've seen with your patients, there's a big difference between being alive and actually living. And
Yeah.
if I'm gonna be around till I'm 90 or 100, I still want to be able to crush that Peloton. I might join you in CrossFit finally, but maybe when I'm 100, I'll start doing CrossFit. But I want to actually be able to live, not just be alive.
Yeah. Well, that's the goal, and it's good that you're doing something about it before before you need. I mean, you need to all the time, but that you're not waiting till you get sick to do something about it, which is what far too many people do.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, Dr. Eades, thank you so much for this time.
Hey,
I'm so grateful.
it's been my pleasure. We can do it again sometime.
I'll take you up on it for sure. Get back to Texas and let's do this in person.
All right, we'll do.
All right.
Take care.
Thank you, Doctor.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Well, hey, folks, thanks so much for joining us. This has been a Texas Titans media production. Drew Koch, producer. Thank you for joining us. Please consider following us on Facebook at Jason Wright TX or on Instagram at Jason Wright Now. Again, I cannot tell you how grateful I am for you listening. And if you get a moment, please go out to iTunes and rate the show. Let us know what you think, and we would be ever so grateful. Thank you. Have a great, great week, and get out there and do something titanic. Thank you, folks.